aborting fetuses a few days after birth and things like that. And that's repugnant, right?
I think you're doing backflips to justify this.
No, that's what I believe.
I get that you believe it, but like,
I don't think I'm doing backflips at all. I get your point.
1 in a million to one villain. Too hot to be in the kitchen. I'll end up melting the ceiling.
Let's do Roe v. Wade first.
Roe v. Wade, okay? I've been pro-choice my entire life.
Yeah.
And there's two reasons why I am pro-choice. The first reason is that I believe that the only reason anybody would actually believe that life begins at the moment of conception is religion. It's not a scientific position. I do not believe that anybody can look at a fertilized egg or a clump of cells smaller than a small fly or whatever and say, okay, that's a human sentient life. I don't believe that. The only reason you would believe that is because of religion. So I believe that the anti-abortion position is pretty solely a religious position. Second, I believe rule one of society should be you own you. Okay? You own you. You can do whatever you want to do with you as you like. And I think that you own you should have been a constitutional amendment. I think bodily autonomy should be a part of the Constitution. I acknowledge that it's not.
Okay.
I acknowledge that the assertion that the right to abortion is a function of the right to privacy is a tenuous argument, in my opinion. So when the Supreme Court struck that down, I do see their point, because saying that, I do see both sides of it. Okay, it is my privacy to go get the surgery that I want, but is that really privacy though? That's just privacy. I'm just going to tell you that's not privacy, right? That going to get the surgery I want isn't the same as getting the surgery and not telling anybody. That's privacy. So I don't get that. But that ruling, Roe v. Wade, did perform the function of giving people bodily autonomy and mandating bodily autonomy in all 50 states. And, you know, Javier, I went to school after my master's degree, and one of the classes that I took was a third-year intellectual law degree, a third-year law class, international intellectual property. And in that class, I learned that if you get the right result for the wrong reason, it fails. Okay, the right result for the wrong reason fails. This was the right result for the wrong reason. This was bodily autonomy because surgery is a part of privacy. But bodily autonomy. So I loved it because it was important, because bodily autonomy is number one. And I think the Republican Party should be about bodily autonomy, because that's the epitome of small government. Stay the fuck off my, can I swear?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, stay the fuck off my body, right? That's bodily autonomy. And so that's like the epitome of small government to me, you know, staying the hell away from you. And so I think that should be a Republican position, but it's not. So
all right, so let's break it up, all right, so we can focus, right? Because I disagree with you, right?
That's because you're wrong. You're wrong. You're a fucking Nazi. You're a Nazi, man, and a white supremacist too.
You finna be embraced by the left again. David's one of us again. Let's bring him back in the fold.
I'm not one of either of you, I'm afraid. I am not one of either side. I know you want to break into it. I look at the left and I look at the right, and I see two parties I just cannot be a part of. The left is racist and vapid. The right is not appreciative of the separation of church and state or bodily autonomy, celebrating the end of abortion rights or celebrating the end of required abortion rights, celebrating the prayer in schools. Oh my God, you're not my party.
All right, so look, I'm gonna see if I can convince you on why the conservatives' position on abortion is more sound. And I'm not necessarily speaking as a Republican because I'm not a Republican, but I'm speaking as a conservative, right? Um, and I don't think that my conservative ideology determines whether I should be pro-life or pro-choice. Okay. So, first thing, I noticed that earlier you admitted that in the Constitution, it doesn't spell out that abortion is a right, but you feel as if it should. But you do agree that it's not in the Constitution.
I do.
All right. That's a good place to start. The second thing that you brought up was bodily autonomy. Do you believe that a fetus is a woman's body? Do you believe that a woman has 20 toes, 20 fingers, 2 heads?
I believe that there is a line between conception and birth.
Where do you draw that line?
That is up to an individual. There's no way around it.
So you would
the only thing you have to look, there's a line, okay? And I'll stand with you shoulder to shoulder to say that line is before the 9th month. Okay? Yeah. Okay, you got an 8-month-old fetus. I don't want you to abort it. I want you to try and save it. Okay? You got a 4-month-old fetus, a 3-month-old fetus. You got a clump of cells that's not alive. It's just not a person.
All right, so let's go backwards. Let's go backwards then. Okay, there's a few things here. We can talk about life and we can talk about personhood.
Yeah.
Those are two separate things, right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Would you agree that a fetus is a life form?
Nope.
So you don't believe that a fetus is a living organism?
It's a relative term. Life is a relative term. Okay? If you've got a parasite, is that a life? I guess so. But this isn't really that yet, because a parasite comes outside the body and attaches to a body. So the fetus is really a growth. Okay.
But only life forms grow, right?
The mother grows. The mother is alive.
Are you
saying that things inside them, tumors and babies and things like that? That doesn't mean that the tumors are alive. Tumors grow inside bodies. Tumors are not alive.
But this is the problem with that. Tumors and fetuses are categorically different. And the reason I say that is because a fetus has its own DNA, its own genetic code, which is separate from the mother.
So if a cancer had a different genetic code, that would make it alive?
It doesn't have human. Well, cancer is the cells going crazy. Cancer is basically.
Let's say those cells go crazy, and somebody does a test and says, "Wow, these cells have mutated. They have a different DNA structure." Does that cancer cell become alive then?
Well, those cells are life, but they're not human life. We have to make a distinction between human life versus life, right? We would say a dog doesn't give birth to a human, right? A dog will never give birth to a human. Only a human will give birth to another human.
Only a human would give birth to another human, but humans can also grow tumors.
Yes, humans can grow tumors, but here's the difference.
The fact that there's something inside a person that's growing does not mean that individual thing is alive, even if it has different DNA. And you know what? You and I don't see that we're going to get to the point of that, but I don't think that I don't think we're going. All right, I shouldn't cut the.
I'm trying to.
I shouldn't cut the discussion off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to appeal to the logical reasoning here, right? So, we know that only life forms grow. We know that.
Tumors grow.
Tumors are life, right? Cells are alive, but it's not.
Tumors are lives. Yeah. Okay. Tumor, yeah. All
right. We got to take it in stages. First, we have to establish it is a life, regardless if you agree that it is a certain type of life. We will agree that it's life.
The cells in the fetus are alive, like the cells in a tumor are alive. Right. But in order for you to tell me that the fetus itself is its own life, that's a judgment call that we're all going to make on an individual level. Super religious people are going to call them life at the moment of conception. Super non-religious people are going to give them a life some other time. And
we're trying to do it based on a scientific basis, right?
There isn't one. If there is one, we'd know it, right? Okay, so how about when the heartbeat starts? Okay, well, flies have heartbeats, so is a fly a sentient human life? How about when you sense brainwaves? Well, parasites have brainwaves. Is that a sentient? There's no switch.
But
There's no on-off switch.
you would have to argue that a fly or a dog or a cat is distinctly human. Humans and cats have totally different DNA sequences.
Mm-hmm.
So a fetus is unique from all of those other things that you mentioned because it has a human genome. It has a human DNA sequence.
But
So
that doesn't mean it's alive. If it dies, it still has that human DNA sequence. It still has that human genome. So the fact that it has a human genome doesn't make it alive.
what makes it alive is that it's growing.
Tumors grow.
Yeah,
That
but
makes it alive.
tumors and fetuses both grow, yet the tumor doesn't have its own genetic code.
And so what you're telling me is that all a tumor has to do to become alive is mutate its genetic code to become different, and then it's alive. Then it's a human.
No, they're both alive, but one is human, one is not.
Living cells. They're both clumps of living cells. That's different from being living.
If you left a tumor alone, would a tumor eventually leave your body and become independent?
No.
Would a fetus?
Possibly.
Most likely, in most cases.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay, so at some point the analogy falls apart.
At some point, that clump of cells becomes a living being. Yes, and I don't know when that is, and nobody does.
So it's not. So you wouldn't draw the line when it has its own human distinct DNA genome. You wouldn't consider that to be separate.
The definition of life is fuzzy, and I believe, from my understanding, that life is a relative statement. You can be more or less alive, and so it's not a switch. It's a gray area where a person becomes alive enough to be called a living sentient being. It's a judgment call. It's all individual. There's no easy answer. And like I said, the fact that there's no easy answer means it has to default to the one that has the easy answer. The person is definitely alive. Okay. The fetus is not definitely alive. It's not definitely alive. And
how can you say a grown person is definitely alive if you can't define what life is?
Like I said, because
you have to be able to define
that there's a life that, and then you have to define what life is, and you have to define what sentient life is, and you have to define what sentient enough life is.
And then we have to go to the next stage. First, we have to define what life is, and then we have to move to the next stage, right?
It's all a big gray area, right? And so the only time I ever heard a secular argument that held water for anti-abortion is that because it's all a gray area, you just default to the least likely. You just default to zero because you don't want to hurt a life. And I say, okay, that's an extant secular argument. I don't like it because it outweighs the woman, and it doesn't take into account the odds that something that has 50 cells is a sentient being. The odds of a 50-celled being or a 5,000-celled being a sentient being, it's ridiculously small. It's not a life. It's a clump of cells. And,
okay. You say it's not a life, David. You say it's not a life.
That's right.
And I asked you to define life, and you say you can't.
That's right.
So how do you know if it's a life or not a life if you can't define what life is?
Because that's how you do it. That's how we do this. There is no definition of life. It's like porn. Okay. What's porn? Okay. You know it when you see it, right? What's life? You know it when you see it, and you know it when it's not. And somewhere in the middle, there's a switch. Somewhere in the middle, erotica becomes pornography. Somewhere in the middle, a clump of cells becomes a human life.
All right. Follow my logic here. All right. At some point, Europeans landed on the continent of Africa, and they saw Black people, Africans. To them, they believed that Africans was not as sophisticated as them. They believed that they were not as civilized as them or advanced as them. And based on what they saw, Africans were a lesser life form than what white people were, what Europeans were, which allowed them to justify doing horrendous things to those people because they saw them as less than.
Yeah.
Even to the point where they consider slaves to be 3/5 of a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're going by just what you can see, or you'll know it when you see it, how come those white Europeans didn't know it when they saw it, when they arrived on the shores of Africa?
How come they didn't know black people were people?
Yeah.
I don't know. Massive amounts of ignorance, I guess.
Okay, so based on the logic that you're saying right now is, if you know it when you see it, well, different people draw that line differently, and that can justify all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, it's true. It's true. We don't have a good, clean answer here. We don't have a good, clean answer now, and because I mean, I've heard some of the, the right-wing horror stories about people, aborting fetuses a few days after birth and things like that, and that's repugnant, right? That's repugnant to me. There are some people on this planet that's not repugnant to. Okay,
Yeah.
there's some people that's not repugnant to. Okay, it's repugnant to me. But also the idea of taking a woman who, taking a person and saying, okay, you don't own your body enough to stop that clump of cells from becoming a baby. That's absurd to me. That's a violation. That's a deep violation. To go to somebody and say, okay, something's forming in you. You have to have a baby now. You have to keep that. You have to brew it. You don't own your body enough.
I don't see it that way. Like, look, okay, for
No,
90,
wrong.
most abortions, I think less than 1% of abortions happen due to rape, incest, and the mother's life is in danger. Those are the very small cases. Majority of the cases where a woman has an abortion is because I can't afford it. I don't want another child. Different convenience.
Reason doesn't matter if it's on the early side of life.
Okay, now check this out. Right, I want to give a huge thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. See, if you're anything like me and you care about your privacy, your security, and your data, then you definitely need to be using ExpressVPN. I'm not just saying that. I care about my viewers and I care about myself, which is why I use ExpressVPN. I was ignorant at one point. I used to think that using incognito mode would protect me from like big corporations collecting all of my data, selling it to these anonymous third parties who would like use it to manipulate me or to try to sell ads to me. But incognito mode doesn't protect me from that, because my internet service provider can still see every single website I visit, which means they can see every single website you visit. But with ExpressVPN, they actually protect your data, and they do that by rerouting your internet connection through their secure service, which allows you to visit any site you want and be anonymous. Not only is that the case, but they also keep all of your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data with the most powerful encryption services on the market. Most of the time, you don't even realize it's running in the background. ExpressVPN is available on all your devices, phones, computers, even your smart TVs. So it's really no excuse why you shouldn't be using it. On top of that, if you watch different streaming services like Netflix, then ExpressVPN will allow you to have up to 94 different IP addresses in different countries, which will give you access to shows that you don't even have available in your own country. So why not give it a try? Protect your online activity today with the VPN rated #1 by CNET. Visit my exclusive link, expressvpn.com/Javier, and you can get 3 extra months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/Javier. expressvpn.com/Javier to learn more. When you say that we shouldn't be telling a person that they have to have a baby, I don't necessarily see it that way. What I see is when majority of these people engage in certain activities that could potentially cause a impregnation. It can cause a person to become pregnant. When 2 people engage in that activity, by default, I believe that they are consenting to taking on that risk.
Oh, now you're punishing people for having sex.
It's not a punishment. That's nature. That's life.
You're punishing people for having sex. People are allowed to have sex.
Yeah, I'm not saying people. I'm not saying people shouldn't have sex. I'm not saying when they should or how they should. What I'm saying is when you do have sex, there are possible outcomes to that. We would agree to that, right?
Of course.
And are
course
those
they
not two
are.
people consenting to taking that risk?
Yeah.
Now, if I went into Las Vegas and I decided to gamble and I lost all my money gambling, no one would come to me and say, they're forcing you to give up all of your money. They're saying when you walked into that casino.
No, but if you went to the casino and you lost all your money, nobody's forcing you to give up all your money. But then if they refused to let you get a job because you lost all your money, and you say you lost all your money, you can't get a job now. Well, wait, I'm completely capable of getting a job. No. We're punishing you for losing your money. So now you can't get a job. That's exactly what you're doing. You're punishing
How
them.
does that translate?
Because they are allowed to do something to fix their situation, and you're taking that away from them. There's a fix. Okay, people make mistakes, people err, and there's a fix, an easy fix.
Okay, so
not a harmful fix. People fuck up. People have sex. People fuck up.
The fetus is harmed. The fetus
is
harmed.
not a life.
When is life? We both agree, we both established that you said you can't define life.
That's correct. You can't either. But I'm saying that there's no simple solution here. Okay, the entire pregnancy is a gray area. Let's just say that the entire pregnancy is a gray area. Life begins in there. That's what we know. That's what we think we know.
But I don't see how
some people will say it'll begin afterwards. But I'm just going to say that those people are fringe, and we'll call them crazy. And we'll say that somewhere between conception and birth, life begins, and life is a gray area itself. So that is not Boolean. It's kind of an ooze across time.
Shouldn't we err on the side of caution if we don't know?
And that's the secular pro-choice, secular pro-life.
That's not erring on the side of caution, because you could potentially be killing a life.
That's the secular pro-life argument. Yes, but the other side of it is that you're definitely the could be is infinite, is tiny. That
compared to what
could be compared to the definite harm that you're causing to a person.
What harm? Most women give birth and they're fine.
No, you're harming their lives. You're harming their lives.
Does adoption not exist?
Adoption exists, yes.
So a woman could give birth and give up her child for adoption. That is an option, right?
Of course they could. But
that's an option.
You're them to become incubators at that point.
No,
you're causing them to become incubators at that point.
That argument that you're making is like me saying, when I went into a casino to gamble, the person who allowed me to gamble is causing me to be broke. No. When I gamble, I run the risk of losing all of my money. When you engage in certain behavior as adults, you're risking getting impregnated.
Yes, that's true.
So just by me walking into that casino, I am consenting.
And you can consent to that, and you can go get another job and earn that money back. But if you get pregnant, you need to be able to have the procedures to back yourself up.
We just established that there are other options, right?
There are other options, but this is the best option, and everybody knows it.
The best option
is not to be pregnant. Yes, the best option is not to go through that.
The best option is probably not. Okay, in my opinion, right?
Best option is not to have sex.
I'm about to be 30 this year. This month, I'm about to be 30, right? And this whole time, out of my 30 years on this planet, I have yet to have an accidental pregnancy on my watch. All right. Now, look, I'm not saying that. Look, and I've been sexually active, right? But here's the situation. I know that every time I lay down with a woman, I am running the risk of her getting pregnant, right? I consent to that the moment I lay down and engage in certain activity. I am fully aware of the consequences and willing to accept that responsibility because I know the actions that I'm taking can result in that.
I think you and I are fighting slightly two different arguments, okay? You are accepting a risk when you have sex. As abortion is illegalized in those states, people who are going to be having sex are going to be taking that risk, okay? People who are going to be having sex are taking that risk of having an abortion, of getting pregnant in a state without abortion. Okay, that's not the topic, though. The topic that I'm arguing is whether or not that right should be taken away. Yeah, you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk whether that right is there or whether that right is taken away. And yes, hopefully you're taking out that risk knowingly. Nobody is going to go to those people in Alabama and say, you had sex in a state where you had sex in a state in Alabama, but you didn't know that abortion wasn't illegal there. Everybody knows. And they did it anyways. That's not what's been happening up until now. That's not what's been happening. That's what's going to be happening moving forward. What I'm saying is that change is bad, and that everybody should be in the situation where you could be yelling at them to not have the abortion by choice. But now we've got a situation where bodily autonomy is not a federal right anymore. And it wasn't ever, okay? It should have been, but it wasn't ever. But it almost was. To a degree, it was. My body, my choice was real until vaccinations came around.
But we're not even arguing whether it's bodily autonomy. We're arguing whether or not that body that you're saying has autonomy is separate from the body that's growing inside of it.
We're not going to find the answer in this discussion.
So we can't make a bodily autonomy argument if we can't even decide if the fetus is the woman's body or not.
Oh, I disagree.
Now, we're talking about whether a woman has a right to end a life for her own convenience versus that child having a right to live.
And what are the odds of her ending a life? Okay. And we have to look at that.
Abortion,
okay?
100%.
Really? You think it's 100% sure that you're killing a life at a 1 month old? You're not killing shit at 1 month old.
I think
okay?
most
the woman is wearing a condom at 1 month old. It's contraception at 1 month old. There's no life termination.
I think that most biologists agree that life begins at conception.
I don't think that's true. I don't.
All right. So Princeton University says life begins at fertilization with embryo conception. Life begins at fertilization with the embryo's conception. Development of the embryo begins at stage 1 when a sperm fertilizes an oocyte, and together they form a zygote. But human development begins after the union of male and female gametes.
What is life? Is a fly life? Is a parasite life? How much life do you need? How much alive do you need to be before you're valued enough to be considered a human life? I don't know.
Okay, so science determines.
Okay, you're reading articles from scientists who know more than me that say life begins at conception. Okay, but that's not human life. That's not a sentient human life.
If it's not human life, what kind of life is it?
Like I said, it's a subhuman life. It's almost life. It's less than life. It's less than sentient life. It is.
David, I think you're doing backflips to justify this.
No, that's what I believe.
I get that you believe it, but like
I don't think I'm doing backflips at all. I get your point. Okay. I cannot identify with the person who says we're going to make a human being, we're going to make a woman carry a zygote to term just to make sure that the zygote, which is smaller than the head of a pin, isn't human life, isn't sentient human life. It's not.
Are we basing life on the size of an organism?
We can choose. You can choose. The definition of life is too liquid. We can't settle it.
But science has already settled it.
No, we have.
Is that not what science does?
You read one article, and then the question is, what is sentient life?
Okay, so now we're talking about sentience.
Yeah,
not
because
life.
we're going to talk about the difference between a parasite and a fetus.
All right, so we can get to sentience, but I still need you to admit that is life. Whether you consider it human life or any other kind of life, you do agree that it is a form of life.
I admit that the cells are alive, and I admit that you seems to have just read an article from Princeton doctors who claim that life begins at conception. I am not going to tell you that a fetus is an individual human life until something happens, and it's not a Boolean thing. It's a phase that it goes through. And on the other side of that phase, I would call it sentient human life. On the
So you wouldn't consider it to be a cycle of human life. Like 2 years old is different than being 20 years old. They're in different development stages of human life. You wouldn't consider it to be one of the development stages of human life.
I would. Of course I would.
Okay, so then you have to consider it to be
when it becomes. I don't know, Javier. I don't know. There's where life begins, when life begins is a judgment call. We don't have a good time. And it's not just when life begins, when sentient human life begins.
Why do you
When
draw the line at sentience? Sentience.
I don't have any idea when to draw the line of sentience. I don't
Okay.
have any idea.
Okay. So, all right, David, if I gave you a box and I told you it could be a cat inside the box, or it couldn't, right? You don't know if it's a cat in the box or not.
That's correct.
Would you then take the box and start to smash it against the ground?
Okay. If you had a box and you told me there might be a cat in the box, there might not be a cat in the box.
Mm-hmm.
And the chance that there's a cat in the box is about
50-50.
1 in 10,000.
It's 50-50.
And no, not 50-50.
I'm giving you a box,
Not
and I
50-50.
said that I
You're-
might have put a
you're
cat in
making
it.
an analogy to a zygote. You're making an analogy to a
I'm
zygote.
focused-
It's not a 50-50 chance. It's not a 50-50 equation.
What I'm asking is, you don't know if it's a cat in the box, do you? You don't know.
Correct.
Would you then slam the box on the ground and start kicking it and stumping it?
I would weigh that need to kick and stomp this box against the benefits of kicking and stomping the box over the risks of hurting the kitty in the box. Now, if somebody said, okay, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that there's a kitty in the box, and if you kick and stomp it, if you don't kick and stomp it, I'm going to kill all these people for sure. I'm going to stamp and kick that box. Okay? So there's a relative statement there, and there's judgment calls, and there's pluses and minuses. This is not an easy decision.
All
And
right,
that's why it has to be individual.
I'm
And that's
saying-
why we have to respect bodily autonomy.
David,
That's why
I'm-
bodily autonomy has to come first.
I'm trying to respect bodily autonomy, but not at the cost of another body's autonomy, like another body's autonomy. Why does it
Yeah.
have to be both?
Well,
Why can't it be both?
it goes back to sentience. It goes back to when that life becomes a person.
Okay,
when-
define sentience or define person.
I cannot.
All right. For you to take a hard stance on something, I would think that you would have a definite idea of what you mean when you say something, because your argument rests on you
I have
having.
a definite idea. Listen, you're not getting me, okay? Life is relative. This whole thing is a relative statement. I can't tell you. I can't define sentience, but I know what it is. I can't define personhood, but I know what it is. Just like porn, just like you're in the same place, okay? And what I'm saying is that when there's a stage, there's a period of time between conception and personhood / sentience, before which termination is contraception. Okay, that time exists too, and you're assuming that time doesn't exist. Okay, and I think that's a disservice to human beings when you're.
I'm not pretending. I'm saying if we don't know,
you're assuming it doesn't. You got a cat in a box, okay, and that cat represents the time between fertilization and sentience. Okay, and you don't know that doesn't exist, do you? So you're going to kick the box?
I don't draw the line as far as abortion when it comes to sentience. I draw the line at life. I think only pro-choicers use the word sentience or personhood to try to justify abortion. The law has no interest.
It does justify abortion.
The law doesn't have any interest when it comes to person or sentience. It says nothing about the sort. What it says is they have a right to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The law doesn't say anything about sentience. That's why they overthrew Roe V Wade, because it was based on something that the court could not decide for themselves. If it was like you said, if it's a gray area, how does the federal court get to decide that this is what is right and that everybody else should just abide by those rules? That's why the court overthrew it.
I read the legal argument. I understand it. I'm not in strong disagreement with them from a legal perspective. Okay. I understand the point that having surgery is not a part of privacy. Okay. I get that. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. I wish it were different. And I wish there were a constitutional amendment for bodily autonomy, because that's what we really should need. That's what we really should have. And, that's And then because you own yourself, at least we should have a country where you own you, where
You do own
you.
yourself.
Then you hand off my body. Then I'm going to do with my body what I want.
Okay, so why is it that everybody is like women should have bodily autonomy to make their own decisions, and then we also don't encourage an environment where women make the right decisions? Like, there are so many single mothers because they decided to sleep around with different guys, or different guys decided to sleep around with multiple women and not take care of their children or not take care of that woman, right?
Yeah.
And before abortion is even on the table, we have created a society where casual hookups are just fine. And we shouldn't be able to criticize when a man goes out and sleep with multiple people, or a woman goes out and sleep with multiple people. You're not supposed to bring that up. You're not supposed to say, hey, this might not be a good idea, because then people will yell at you, well, don't tell me what to do, or you're trying to control women, or you're trying to control people's sexual lives. And it's only saying that there are unwanted consequences to this type of behavior. And before we get to abortion, we should be able to have this conversation about the kind of actions that lead to those decisions. And I just feel that a lot of people want to have both. They want you to be able to not criticize bad sexual behavior and acts, while at the same time knowing it's going to result in unwanted pregnancies that will force women in these situations to have to make these tough calls. And I think the pro-choice side has shifted a long way since it was safe, legal, and rare. It has become to the point where abortion is supposed to just be, I'm not going to say celebrated, but there are people out there who celebrate abortions, right?
Yeah.
But we've gotten to this point where this hookup culture is just celebrated, even though it's having dire consequences and negative consequences.
So I agree with almost everything that you just said. Okay. I agree strongly that we have a sexually irresponsible society. And I don't like the conflation of sexual irresponsibility with hookup culture. I have indulged in that culture quite a bit.
Congratulations.
My point is that safety is key, and everything is fun when you're safe and you take responsibilities and you act like an adult. I think that the sexual irresponsibility side of that is a plague, and it's plaguing the poor more than anyone else. So it's plaguing the people who it hurts the most more than anyone else. I think that people who can't, buy fun, make fun, right?
Yeah.
And so they fuck a lot, and that's fine. But the sexual irresponsibility, the short-sightedness of sexual irresponsibility isn't being promoted by our society at all. Isn't being, it's not being, sexual responsibility isn't being promoted in our society. Responsibility in and of itself isn't even a part of our society in and of itself. You tell somebody to be responsible, you're assaulting them.
Mm-hmm.
Your words of violence. You can't tell me to work. Don't tell me to work. You're oppressing me. I think pretty much everything you just said is correct, except that one little bit. I think we are killing ourselves from the inside in this way. We are taking our very, very quickly swelling lower class, the class that's living paycheck to paycheck, or less, and we are giving them a society that promotes their own destruction.
And there's more to the conversation that we don't even get to, right? Like, I've seen cases personally, and this is not to say what abortion is like overall. I'm not saying this is most women's reality or whatever, but I've seen cases where guys literally pressure women to go get abortions, even though that woman doesn't want an abortion.
Well, that's as well. That's oppression as well. It's not oppression. But argument isn't oppression, but I think you're talking about oppression. I think pushing them and making them do this against their will, that's oppression.
Yeah, and I've seen where parents done that to their 14-year-old daughter or 15-year-old daughter where you're going to get this abortion. And
Frankly, I would do the same thing.
I get it, but like
I would do the same thing.
I get it. And
as a father of a female, had she gotten pregnant at 14.
But what about my body, my choice?
You're 14, your body, my fucking choice.
One in a million to one villain. Too hot to be in the kitchen, out in the melting the ceiling.